Welcome to the Happy Mindset, episode 136. Today's episode is called Why Podcast. Today I'm just going to share some thoughts around why I podcast, why I enjoy doing it, what I actually get from this. This is another one in the series of why code, why write, why podcast. It's funny because they all interlink. The coding, the writing, the podcasting, they interlink with each other. They each give me something different that it's like a symbiotic relationship where they kind of bounce off each other. So with writing helps me to like consciously think about things, slow down my thinking process, to really like dig into things. There's more of a flow to speaking. So speaking lets me actually verbalize and speak things out that I mightn't necessarily get at with the writing. It's more of I feel with speaking on a podcast is more of a visceral experience. I really have to like breathe better when I'm on the podcast. I really have to slow down my speech a bit more, and as well be more aware of the filler words that I use as a speaker automatically. I don't have that problem with writing because I get that time where I'm not going to put in filler speech because you're writing it out. It's kind of like the thing with translation and interpretation. With translation, I find translating in a written form easier than interpreting in the moment because you've got time to really refine it. Sometimes that's a double-edged sword because sometimes you have too much time to refine it and you can get really nitpicky about stuff and get lost in the detail too much and start second guessing yourself a lot. So I guess that's the trade-off there with interpretation. There's a bit more of a flow to it. You'll make a mistake, but you move on, you learn from it. There's not as much time to second guess yourself and analyze things to death. So with the podcasting, it's different to interpretation and translation because I actually find it quite therapeutic. If you do go to coaching or if you go to therapy, what you'll find is that when you verbalize something out, when you speak something out, when you can feel into emotions that are bottled up, there is a freedom there. You feel lighter for it. You've probably had this experience before. Anytime you feel like you've got something off your chest, it's like a weight that's been lifted off you. I find podcasting similar yet different in that if you're in a coaching session or a therapy session, or if you're speaking to even a close friend about something personal, you don't have to think about how it's being received necessarily. If you've got the right person in front of you who's created a space of non-judgment and is just listening to you, you don't necessarily have to think about how you're wording stuff. You could say gibberish, you could say babble and stuff, but once you're releasing that energy, even if there's a lot of hate coming out or something coming out, that's okay in a private, closed environment where it's safe and non-judgmental. Podcasting is slightly different. I can't do the same thing. But at the same time, what podcasting gives me that which a private thing wouldn't give me is a sense of accountability for myself. That when I'm putting something out there, it's more public. And what I found difficult for a long time in this personal growth, personal development process, sometimes it feels like you've got two personalities. You've got your public-facing personality. It's kind of like a feeling of the old image you put up to the world when you were insecure about things. So you're still working through that. And in the private life, you feel, I suppose if you're in a coaching session or if you're around people where you feel like you can leave your guard down, you feel like this is the new person I'm building, yet there's still like this public-facing persona that I don't necessarily enjoy being in. It feels like a suit I'm wearing from the past. Podcasting helps me to navigate that split and to integrate that better. Because I know with podcasting, because I'm putting it out there into public domain, anybody can come across it. So you accept that at the beginning. It's the same thing even with writing a book. I put a book out there, I accept that that's out there for public consumption. It might make me feel a bit uncomfortable to begin with, especially if I'm exploring stuff that is quite personal, but I've accepted that to begin with. Like in life, there's trade-offs, there's pros and cons. I've accepted that the upside is better than the downside to it. I'd much rather feel like me and feel free and possibly, well, not even possibly, and face judgment and rejection from people for that, rather than putting out a persona out there that's going to get rejected anyway or judged by some other people. That isn't actually me. That doesn't actually feel like me, and it's not something that I feel like. I don't feel alive. I don't feel like I'm doing something that matters or that I want to be doing. So with the podcasting, it also opens up the door to meet other people. And that opens up conversations. That opens up new perspectives. I found the difficult thing with writing over the years has been that I don't have that outlet with podcasting. I'm not speaking directly to somebody when I'm engaging in it. But with podcasting, I'm speaking directly to somebody. And it's also giving me that opportunity to just listen to somebody that I don't get necessarily with writing. And that complements your writing. When you're a better listener, you can attune with people more as well. And so you're writing stuff that will actually be more relevant and more relatable. Because when you're in your own little echo chamber and you're not listening to other people and you're not engaging in conversations, your writing's going to fall flat because it won't resonate with people and it'll just fall flat. So I've had that experience for years now. There's certain things that will land. Still to this day, I'll say certain things. I'll write a post online. It won't seem to land with anybody. I'll write another post and it seems to land with a few people. So podcasting helps me to lower that gap a bit more. When I'm engaging with different types of personalities, it's giving me a more realistic view on the world. It's not just my perspective, then I'm taking other perspectives. I suppose with podcasting, it also gives me that outlet to get the ideas, get the thoughts out of my head in a productive and creative way. When I wasn't doing this, they were just left to fester there. There was just feelings there that I wanted to express, but I could never express them. So it was kind of left to just fester there. And it was more of just a dullness and a numbness to my life. And it was difficult to deal with, to be honest, until I started getting this stuff out and creating from that. Because you get into a vicious cycle where you're stuck with these feelings that you want to express, but then you've got a fear about expressing them and how they're going to be received. And when you're not doing it as well, the fear just builds more and more. Also, it's like a monster in your mind. I can remember the first time I even posted on my Facebook page, my personal page, somebody actually had to tell me to do that, get me to do that. It was something that was personal. I think it was my first blog post that I posted on my Facebook page. That was only about 3 or 4 years ago. And that was a big thing for me. So podcasting has helped me to get over self-consciousness. This is something that I think we all deal with. If I'm going to, there's like a biblical kind of image that comes to mind for me there. It's like the Adam and Eve, the fall from grace, and them being naked. So when I think about this, it's metaphorical. I think about it as in like when we had the concept of shame, that we're being naked. So that's what it's like as a creator, by bearing stuff out there, bearing your soul and putting stuff out there that is coming from your heart. There's a sense of nakedness and vulnerability to it as well, self-consciousness. So I think we all have that since that picture of Adam and Eve falling from grace. That's something to work through as a human, as a person, and that's what I do through the podcast on a lot of different levels. First of all, it's even directly on the podcast. I remember the first few episodes, first year or two, just speaking on the podcast, I could feel the self-consciousness in me of how I'm going to be perceived. It wasn't even thought patterns that were going through my head. It was just, I could feel I was kind of uptight about it. And I kind of had a feeling of why I was uptight about it, but I just couldn't really express that and own that. So that was one level of it. The other level was actually going into work and maybe meeting people that I don't know whether they've listened to my podcast or not, or whether they're aware of my stuff or not, that they might have been aware of it. And so there's just kind of this feeling of awkwardness there that you don't really know what to do with. So that's another thing that I've been navigating with the podcast, because it's so much more public. It feels so much more public than just writing. I find with the blog post, that was difficult at the beginning for me, but there's a level of distance I find as a writer. It doesn't feel as personal when you're putting stuff out there, because it's words on a page more so than people can actually see you on YouTube speaking and voicing your thoughts and things. And I guess the other thing that's difficult is that as a creative person, you know that your thoughts and opinions will evolve over time. Your thinking will evolve over time. So there's probably going to be videos that you look back on and you'll be wondering, how was I thinking that way? But that you also realize that that's an extension of you keep building on your own thinking. Just like every generation builds off the previous generation's thoughts, standing on the shoulders of giants, you do that on an individual level as well. When you're consistently putting content out there, it builds on top of each other. So that building block way back last year that might look to you now as something that, why was I thinking like that, was actually a building block that got you to your future self. So without any of these building blocks, you won't get to that future self. Just be stuck and stagnant and just thinking about the world exactly like how other people thinking about the world, just trying to fit in that way, which as a creative person is stifling, and you don't really, it's not worth living you don't feel alive when you're kind of stuck like that. And the curious thing that I've learned through podcasting over the last 3 years is that the first thing that I used to be weird about or awkward about was this kind of idea in my head that I was putting something online that wasn't really me. That I had my real life here, where I don't know how I was kind of looking at myself, but I didn't see myself as this creative person I was putting online. There was kind of a feeling of you're presenting a facade there that's not you. I don't know whether I feel like that could be something that most people will go through, because it wasn't necessarily coming from me. It was coming from what I thought other people, how I thought other people were perceiving me. That was more the feeling of what will that person, I think that person is going to be saying that this guy is putting stuff online, it's not him. That's where the feeling was actually coming from, what I've realized over time. It's only been in the last few months, the last week or so even, that I started to really notice that the stuff I'm putting online in my podcast, the stuff I'm writing about, is actually what feels real about me. It's the other parts that don't feel real about me. It was a weird switch, a weird kind of, it was a complete flip from something that I felt like I was putting this stuff out there that's not me, to realizing that that's actually probably the realest part about me in my day to day. That's liberating. It's quite sad to actually recognize that, because the feeling I've been living with the last year has been one of, I think I'd mentioned it before, I felt like I was waiting around for something. And what I would pinpoint to that is that these windows during the week where I was doing my podcast or doing my writing, they were the windows where I felt alive, where I felt me, where I felt free to be me and real, and I was actually working through stuff and evolving. And that was probably only 20% of the week. It was the other 80% that I felt like I was just going through the motions. Yeah, so it's a weird one to describe, because I guess I was coding on the other side of things, and there's an element of that helps me to work through problems and stuff. But I guess I don't see that as much as me. I guess I see coding as like a very thought out problem solving. There's an objectivity to it there, where I see the problem and I'm working to solve the problem. But I guess because I'm not choosing the problems to work on, whereas with the podcast, when I'm writing, I go off in search of things that are of interest to me, where I can express myself, where I can figure stuff out. Which will lead me to my next point, actually. My podcast is starting to help me to inform my writing and any potential future books that I'll write. So since my last book, my first book, I published it in 2019. That was just last year, wasn't it? It feels like a long year. But since then, I've kind of thought about what's going to be the next book, and I've already done this a few times. I've done this maybe 2 times already, where I felt like I'm onto the next book now. I've got stuff to write about, but it always feels a bit forced. So I was starting to write one book about self-education, because I was looking at it and I'm like, this is what I'm always talking about. This is what I'm talking to people about. This is what the podcast is about. So if I can just lay this out and condense this, that would be a useful book, and it'd be something I'd enjoy doing. But when I was doing it, I felt it was hard to get the content out. And it's only been in the last week that a title came into my head called The Edge. And I started writing about that. And the edge comes from kind of what I'm talking about a little bit today. It's that vulnerability as a creative person, putting your ideas out there for ridicule. And I've got a drive to write that, because there's like a deep feeling. I've gone through that process, and it's been a difficult one to navigate. And that's what I'm kind of at the tip of still navigating that. It probably ties to where I was talking about that complete switch in something that I felt was a fake thing that I was putting out there that wasn't real, to realizing it was the real part of me. It was actually the real part of my life. that was the flip that kind of happens there. So this is where I'm talking about the edge. So the edge, in my understanding, well, not even my understanding, is something I'm coming up with based off of my experiences, and because I can see it in other people, other creative people. I know that it's not just me feeling this way. It might be just expressed in different ways, but the edge anyway is the edge of where you're finding your competencies and where you're expressing yourself. So the edge for me would be the coding, the podcasting, and the writing. That's the edge. So the edge is where I'm connecting these ideas, where I'm connecting thoughts, where I'm expressing things around those edges that nobody else is doing because they're not within those three things. And as well, they don't have my experiences. They don't have what I've gone through. They don't have the things I've had to deal with over the last decade. They don't have the same story. So that's where the edge is. Somebody who's not living on their edge is somebody who hasn't discovered their skill sets. They haven't discovered their voice. They haven't been consciously trying to find their voice or cultivate it, create their voice. They haven't been consciously trying to form their own opinions, their own thoughts, because that's the pain here. Stepping out from the group and forming all that, it takes time to do that properly. And as you're on that process, you'll have a lot of wobbles because it's emotionally charged. It's emotionally charging when you're initially starting to branch out from the group. That's what I would say about that. So even tracing it back to a decade ago when I started being more creative, when I went through my mental breakdown, there was a portion of that there too where I was stepping out from groupthink. And so that was me starting the process of navigating the edge. Because the edge as well is a place where you can tip over the edge and not think straight anymore. So that's the dance you're dancing with here, because the group think can keep you safe, but it can also trap you. So when you're walking the line as an individual, it's bringing it more conscious. So that's what I want to talk about in this book. What's changed from me 10 years later? And it's mainly been down to understanding. It's been down to breath work, being more conscious with that stuff, having compassion, having self-empathy, all this kind of stuff has been huge, because 10 years ago I didn't have any of this stuff. I was just driven by my intellect, and I knew that I wanted to express stuff. I knew I wanted to create stuff. I knew I wanted to think in a different way. I knew I wanted to help other people to think in a different way, think about the world, be more empowered, and just live the life that they were here to live. So I didn't have any of the stuff that I know now that keep me grounded. So I was missing that piece 10 years ago where I could keep grounded, keep perspective day to day. And so that's where I'm genuinely willing to explore that now and write about that. And so that's, as we end 2020, that's a project that I've already started and something that I think I'll stick to it. That was my fear of even saying this in the podcast, because I've started 2 books before this and I didn't feel it. Whereas this one felt different. And this one as well, it's like the name came to me, just like the podcast, the Happy Mindset. That just came to me one day. The Edge came to me one day, the title. And so and because it connects to a feeling I've had for 10 years, I actually go by the feeling. So if you're somebody who wants to write about something, write a book that has meaning for you, go by how deeply it resonates with you. Because when you do that, you won't have the words to begin with, but as you explore the process, you'll write the book, and you'll learn so much stuff from writing the book from a deep sense of a feeling. Rather than, that's where I was struggling with the other 2 books that I tried to start to write, was that I had already had it mapped out. I was just going to go, I've got all the knowledge from the last 10 years. I'm just going to write out what I know here. And it didn't really fuel me. Whereas with this, it's a feeling that I've had the last 10 years at least. But I've never explored it. So that's why I'm excited about exploring this. That's why it feels more like it's something that would fuel me to keep going and doing it, because I know it'll reveal stuff in there that I wasn't able to articulate, I didn't fully understand. That was the process for my last book. That was the process. I had the experience, I had that deep feeling, but I hadn't written that out. I hadn't consciously written that out, and that's what I'm intending to do with this book as well, on creativity, because it's just something that I like doing. Anyway, that's it. That's the end of the year. That's my Why podcast to finish the year, to round out the year. I wish you all the best over the holidays. The holidays are probably gone now, aren't they? But I wish you all the best for the coming year. Hopefully next year will be a bit different. We've gone through a lot of chaos this year with COVID, but this is one of those things as well where I've tried to make the best of the situation for myself with COVID, to just slow down more, to feel whatever's going on for me. The biggest lesson I've learned from COVID was that I was operating a lot from my brain, doing things from my brain without really feeling into how I feel about things. And I think I've made a bit of progress with that, to be honest, over the last few months. So that's something that I just wanted to share there. Hopefully next year will be different, hopefully the world will change in a better way out of this. So that's my hope. That's my wish for next year. And that's it. Wish you all the best, and I will talk to you again next year in a week's time. So thanks again for listening, and I will speak to you on the next episode.